I propose to first present something of a controversial recipe for counterterrorism. So this is something that we can think of as educators, as policymakers, as public health practitioners. So yesterday, Cécile made some very interesting comments about why securitization does not work. So, and there were other interesting comments about jihadi cool, for example. How do we make the project of not being an extremist radical cool and interesting and appealable to young people? How can we, in a sense, recruit youth in another kind of project? So what it seems to me we should be doing, and I'll talk later about the ethical practicalities of this, is, well, we should give people what they think they want. We should, in a sense, create a group identity. And it seems to me that the recipe for this is quite simple. So first, we must create a simplistic philosophy by combining existing ingredients, because if something is too novel, it'll be dismissed as noise. It's too cognitively demanding. So take something like Sufism plus sexual liberation plus a bit of Babylonian, sexual ecstasy, or something like that, right? You have to make it minimally transgressive and subversive. You have to make it moral, transcendent, and minimally anti-establishment. But you have to make it also something of a secret, and you have to make it hard to get accepted into. So the question is, we cannot teach youth, we cannot recruit them, we have to let youth recruit themselves. You have to let youth think that they have chosen to recruit themselves into a new ideology. We, as authority figures, have to actively discredit the ethos and discourage recruitment. We need lots of agents provocateurs to work with us. We need 14 to 20-year-old agents provocateurs who strategically display this ideology and who get kicked out of school. I'll go on to explain why we need to create martyrs. We need to make membership something that is persecutable, punishable. We also need to have other agents provocateurs working as trolls to further discredit the cause, to make people really want viscerally to join this cause. And we have to propagate the idea that it is unsafe to adopt this philosophy. The criteria for inclusion have to be difficult. We have to include what anthropologist Harvey Whitehouse calls imagistic rites of passages. There must be some kind of an ordeal in order to earn membership in this new community. And I strongly recommend some kind of extreme sensory deprivation, maybe not sleeping for 3 days, some kind of survival ordeal, flesh markings would be good, burning, something like that, tattooing at the very least. Dietary restrictions will be great. Then, of course, we have to create subliminal sacred objects, symbols, daily rituals, language shift, and new meanings, so for example. So if I had the time and if I had the courage, I would draw parallels with the contemporary social justice warrior movement that Cécile alluded to earlier, and the few sacred causes, so the transgender identity being one of them, reclaiming of the use of the word safety, safe spaces. It's a fairly good example of how this process can work. Of course, we also must work really hard to create simplified victims and enemies. In particular, categories of victims whose sacredness cannot be questioned or challenged. So again, had I the time or the courage, I would perhaps start asking questions about whether or not transgenderism really is a sacred cause, and I would put myself at something of a risk career-wise, because there's the example of a particular cause that can no longer be questioned. Similarly with enemies. So we need to create categories of enemies like white supremacists or pedophiles. We have to keep it small and exclusive for a while, then we have to slowly relax the criteria for membership as more people join in. Some of you might recall that Facebook and Gmail, the platforms to which we're happily surrendering data about our every thoughts and move, were initially exclusive platforms. Gmail was an invite-only thing. It was only for cool people. So it went for Facebook. Then as the group gets larger, the philosophy will become more standardized, increasingly simple and intuitive, and at some point, once the philosophy can no longer be questioned without great cognitive effort or social cost, we've won. and then all we have to do is let it spread transnationally through the power of prestige. And here I'm quoting, we have to produce something, in the words of Scott Atran, that is socially tight, ideologically narrow, and global spanning. Now, the problem, of course, when I think about the bureaucratic nightmare that it would be to get ethics approval for a project like this, and by ethics, I am not raising any kind of meta-ethical questions about the nature of right and wrong. I'm talking about litigation-obsessed bureaucratic risk management, which has largely replaced ethical preoccupations for most of us. And perhaps it is time, perhaps it is time to have a conversation about what constitutes ethics and ethical research. And so, Lawrence's comments on Neil's methodology, and Lawrence, you made a comment about why perhaps we need more experimental research. I for one, think that we need more large-scale, ecologically based experimental research, and that this is one modest proposal. So a little bit of background, of course, George Orwell's famous comments on the biography of a frustrated painter, Little Corporal, that I don't need to name, but Orwell, I think, very correctly identified that Hitler himself, okay, I've named him now, had identified something really important about human nature, which is that we humans don't only strive for safety and belonging and comfort, we also want struggle, we want self-sacrifice, we want hardship, particularly young people, particularly, but not exclusively, men. A very brief detour again to consider this, and this is to consider the Eichmann, again, looming in all of us, a parallel through the danger, the folly that is romantic love. You know, we often, so I wanted to find the cheesiest image. I just Google, I would die for you. So, you know, perhaps often we find ourselves wanting to tell our sweetheart, I would die for you. Okay, sure, that's great, but it seems to me that a much wiser approach would be, well, would you live for me? Would you quit smoking for me? Would you live well for me? Because that's the point. It is much easier for humans to die in the name of a stupid idea than it is to live well for a good cause. Now, a little bit of a spin on so this quote is not Confucius. If this is not Confucius, by the way, I'm just playing with epistemic authority. I just totally made that up. But it seems to me that it is much harder to live well.
T-shirts tomorrow, though.
To live well for a good cause than to die for a stupid cause.